while ago, the operations, they still have not been able to recover the bodies of these 4 men, but they continue to work assiduously to be able to do so in a safe manner. I am not here today to defend anyone, any company, any individual, any procedure, nor am I here to get into technical details that should and must be left to those professionals with the necessary expertise and experience. That cannot be my task here today. I simply do not have that level of expertise. It is also my view that speculation and assumptions are not useful in these situations, and especially at this point in time. I would like the families of those men whose pain, trauma, hurt, frustration, and even anger I can only imagine, to know that from the government's perspective, we are concerned. We have been concerned, and we remain concerned. We understand the distress, the pain, and the emotions that have been running since this unfortunate accident and tragic incident on Friday afternoon last. Fellow citizens, I got a little experience of it directly on Saturday, just around midday, when I personally met and interacted with the families of these men. I have always directed, from the first time I became aware of this tragic accident and incident, that the priority must be to find these men, that all resources and focus must be to locate and find these 4 divers. Also, I had directed and asked that there be communication with the families and also the population, because the population was concerned as soon as they became aware of this incident. It is apparent that unfortunately on the communication side, it did not go as it should have. But I did continue to direct that the priority in these instances and in this specific circumstance had to be on finding, locating these men, and to do so safely without any further accidents, injuries, or worse yet, loss of life. I had cautioned on Saturday and before and throughout that people running these operations must not be distracted, and that all resources were to be focused on locating these men. I made that very clear in my position as minister and as a concerned citizen, and on behalf of the government of Trinidad and Tobago. I have listened very carefully to the families when I met with them on Saturday, to the persons who have been briefing me throughout, from PARIA, from the Ministry of Energy, Energy Industries, the public, and also others, because there's been a lot of commentary. And I can say safely that unfortunately at this time, no one person has all of the information and all of the facts that transpired leading up to and at the exact time and thereafter of this tragic accident. So again, speculation and assumptions should form no part of the current useful and productive conversation, but also those involved in the operations to locate and find these personnel, these persons, these brothers of ours, must remain focused. And I keep driving that point home to them at all times. Forget the distractions. You have a job to do, do it. Use whatever resources are necessary. You have the full green light from the government from the moment it happened on Friday to use the resources. As you all know at this stage, these men were employed by LMCS Limited, a subcontracting company that's had the expertise to do this type of operation. And in a short while, without getting into the technical side, I think it would be useful to share with the population a drawing that sets out exactly what it is we're dealing with. LMCS was the company that these divers were employed by. They got the contract from PARIA as a result of a competitive tendering process. And presumably it was based on their expertise and the work plan that they put forward to be able to do the job. So you have LMCS as the direct company involved carrying out the operation that unfortunately led to this tragic accident. They were hired by PARIA, PARIA being the fuel company. And it was at PARIA'S facilities, which is offshore. I've been to the site. It's the first thing I did on Saturday morning, to go and see for myself, so I would have a sense of understanding as to what exactly was going on. So it is less than, I would say, a mile offshore. You can actually see it from the shoreline, and there are two pipelines that come out of the water, and I'll show it via drawing in a short while. Post this accident, you have had a number of entities involved in the exercise, firstly to try and rescue the men, and then turning to a finding of these men. You've had our Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard, who have a level of expertise, understand that first responders responding to a situation may arrive there without all of the information, all of the tools that you would wish them to have. That is normal. It is the same thing, for example, if you have a car accident and the first responders reach there and they don't have what we call the jaws of life and these types of things. You had the Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard. Fortunately, because of the type of country we are, a number of other service providers made their way to the site when the Mayday went out and have been working along with PARIA and LMCS. PARIA themselves reached out to many industry experts to assist in an assessment and the provision of equipment and expertise during the last 72-hour roughly period. As I said, I had always cautioned that in these types of situations, you must focus your resources on the task at hand, and the task at hand has always been to locate these men. I was provided with at 2 o'clock on Saturday morning, 2:30 precisely, a chronology that exists almost on a 5 to 10 minute basis from the time that the 5 men entered the chamber at 2:15 p.m. on Friday afternoon, and as best as could be compiled, the chronology of events that took place thereafter, showing what took place. On Saturday, I personally made my way to PARIA'S facilities, again alerting very few people, with a clear directive that no one was to be distracted by my arrival there, because I did not want to be the source of any distraction from the job and task at hand. They did not know, the members of staff, that I was coming. In fact, I did not even go to where I was supposed to meet the general manager, etc., because I went directly to the source and to where the engineers were working in that command room to get a proper briefing and understanding of what exactly it is we were facing. Without distracting them, and after I'd been provided with an understanding of what they believed to have taken place on Friday, I then made my way to the facilities where I met with the family members. Again, cutting through some red tape to ask if all of the family members who were present be allowed in to meet with the general manager, one of the engineers who was there, and myself. Because of course it is important that we communicate with the families and that we listen to the families, and more importantly, that we tell them what was going on. I understand vividly, because I interacted with the families, the Henry family, where unfortunately they lost 2 sons in December. Other members, including family members, who called one of their family members who came, and he was one of the people that dived into the water and helped get Mr. BOODRAM out. Importantly, we listened, and I left there with hope that at that stage the operations would have been successful in locating these men by that time, and also importantly that the family would have continued to have been communicated with. I'm going to ask that PARIA please make the necessary arrangements to bring whatever level of comfort can be brought to these family members as they go through this very devastating and tragic time in their lives, waiting for the recovery of their loved ones. We then went in, they gave me a briefing on what they planned as an operation. There were a number of options and alternatives. Again, it is not for me to get into that level of detail. That will be explained by the experts at the appropriate time as to how they would recover these men. Things change over time as they did risk assessments, as they looked at it, as outside experts came in. We did get outside experts, persons with expertise, to come to the table to assist in the risk assessment and to give the advice, we being PARIA and LMCS. Yesterday, when I was in contact with the personnel from PARIA, they held a meeting with LMCS and went through the plan that was being proposed by LMCS at that point in time. Unfortunately, over time, the various plans and options changed as a result of various risk assessments that were done and the experts who were giving advice. I think at this time it's a good juncture for us to put up a slide that will give a graphic and visual illustration in as simple terms as possible as to what the scene looks like and what it is we're facing, because there's a lot of speculation outside there and a lack of understanding, and I thought it important for at least this diagram to be put up with a very brief, high-level layman's explanation of the scenario that exists there. Again, I am here to cast no judgment, no defense on anyone who's involved in the operations, but I think we, the citizens, and especially for the family's sake, need to have a graphic illustration of exactly the site, scene, and scenario that we're dealing with. Can the slide please be put up? What you're seeing here are what are described as berth 5 and berth 6, which are offshore installations, and literally all you see coming up above the sea level are 2 pipes at the top. The one that has a heading above it, the hyperbaric chamber, is the berth where the work was being carried out by LMCS. The hyperbaric chamber was inserted over this pipeline, and what it then does is it pumps out the water to create airspace for persons to work in. The task at hand, as explained to me, was for them to change some basically nuts in a certain way on that to basically fix a leak on the pipeline, which was done successfully over the past week. And what was to take place on Friday now was the testing of the work that had been done and the removal of 2 flanges that had been inserted to prevent, along where you see that red pipeline coming out, to prevent liquids from coming up. And in that hyperbaric chamber is where these 5 men were working. 4 of them were the divers working on it. The 5th man, who is our fortunate survivor, Mr. BOODRAM, was actually the rescue diver, and hence the reason why he had on his tanks. Right where you see the red, which is in clear, meeting the blue, what you see as a riser at berth 5, there were 2 flanges installed there. The first one was a piece of rubber between 2 metal plates, and of course these flanges go and they meet between these 2 points. So they were inserted somewhere around here. 2 pieces of metal and a rubber piece in between, and the second would have been an inflatable that was blown up. From what we can gather at this stage, unfortunately, when the first one was removed, something took place that created a suction, sucking the 5 divers in from what was a air chamber into this 30-inch pipeline that you see going along in the shape of a U. So I thought it important that we understand that at this berth 6, which is where the work was taking place, that this suction came in and something happened. There's then 1,200 feet running at the bottom, going across, parallel to the sea level surface. And then it connects with a U, an elbow, to the riser at berth 5. Again, another 30, that is the 30-inch pipeline. Sometime thereafter, in the rescue operations, the persons there managed to get 2 sets of equipment. One they actually got from Shell, I believe, which are ROVs that they sent down into the pipeline. It couldn't go in because you needed to send some sort of mechanical or technical equipment in to see what was taking place in this pipeline. Eventually, through one of the underwater cameras, if you go back to the diagram, you would see from that berth 6 elbow along the pipeline, 120 feet, they met an obstruction that was diving equipment stuck. So far, I've been informed that the thought process is that this diving equipment is 2 air tanks that men were carrying on their backs, and that unfortunately blocked the ROV and the camera system from going any further to assist in the location of the men. This diagram sets out the type of operation that it is. You must understand that even though the berth 6 pipeline was cleared of fuels, there would still have been some residual fuel. There's always danger in performing these tasks. But this is what it is. So it was not a simple just dive in, go into the pipeline, as much as our emotions may want us to have done that. So the teams continued to work with the outside experts, LMCS and PARIA together, to come up with options as how best to get past what you saw as those obstructions in the pipeline, the 1,200 feet of pipeline running parallel to the surface. On Sunday, the Ministry of Energy, very early in the morning, had an emergency meeting at the ministry, and we asked our acting permanent secretary, Ms. Sandra Fraser, along with Mr. Mark Rudder, who's the director in charge of petroleum operations, to go to PARIA at the scene and to see what was going on and to provide feedback, because of course the Ministry of Energy as a regulator will have a role to play. That took place, information was being provided back, but again with clear instructions, do not distract those who have to perform their tasks from doing so. In a nutshell, that is what has been taking place. The teams who are not here, who are working from PARIA, LMCS with the experts, are focused on doing what it is. It is very easy for persons to speculate and to say, not moving as quickly as they should be other things to be done. That is not for me at this stage to cast any judgment on or to defend any actions, nor is it that of the government. I am hoping, like the rest of the population, with all of the concerns that I have, and for the sake of these families who have met, that very shortly we get word that these men have been found and that their bodies are returned safely. This is unfortunately a tragic accident, and one that has taken place in other areas around the world in these types of operations, meaning underwater diving. We all know that it is extremely dangerous as an underwater diver doing types of operations. Our heartfelt condolences, sympathy, empathy, and support go out to all of the members of the family. as they go through these difficult times. And the government will be directing PARIA and LMCS and others to do what is necessary for these families at the end of the day. As I conclude my part, after consultation with the Honorable Prime Minister, I want to inform the population that we have taken a decision that there will be an independent investigation carried out by the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, but we made it very clear that it will not be carried out by the Ministry of Energy's personnel alone. We have gone to both, I personally have spoken to both the executives, the heads of BP and Shell in Trinidad this morning, and I've asked both of them for their assistance and to identify personnel from BP and Shell. What I envisage at this stage is a 5-panel investigative committee, probably to be chaired by one of the permanent secretaries at the Ministry of Energy, to be supported by independent professional experts with the requisite expertise. And in speaking to the heads of BP and Shell, they've agreed that they will collaborate to make sure that there's no duplicity of expertise in who they volunteer to this exercise. So one expert from BP, one expert from Shell. I've also identified that we need an expert professional diver who has had sufficient experience in these underwater dives to do with oil and gas installations. And then we'll leave space for another person with the expertise to fill that scoop. I've also told the permanent secretaries this morning that that panel must be provided with a lawyer to provide the legal side. This investigation will take place. This investigation will be charged with the responsibility of going in, analyzing what plans were put in place before the job started, what was taking place during this unfortunate and tragic accident, what took place thereafter, an assessment, an analysis, a critique of what took place at all levels. Importantly, recommendations, identifications of any gaps that may have existed along the way. Fellow citizens, at this stage, respectfully, it is not for any of us to be playing judge and jury on anyone. This, without any doubt, is a tragic accident and one that we all wish never took place, but unfortunately it has. And as I end, before I take questions, on behalf of the government of Trinidad and Tobago, I'd like to say to all of those family members that I met and I can see in front of me as I witness their pain and listen to their frustration and their hurt and the worry from the sister of the 3 brothers, the father, Mr. Henry, Ms. KURBAN, and all of these people. May God be with you. May you continue to have the strength to deal with this unfortunate ordeal and understand that every civic-minded, right-thinking citizen of Trinidad and Tobago stands with you at this time. Thank you. At this stage, I'll invite questions from the members of the media. I think the first question is from Priya Bihari.
Good morning, can you hear me?
Yes, Priya, good morning, ACP News.
Hello, good morning. Hello, good morning.
You all tell him you all can hear him, please.
Hi, good morning, can you hear me?
Sorry, we're having a bit of technical difficulties there.
Yes, good morning, Priya Bihari, ACP News. Minister, the question everyone is asking is why after Mr. BOODRAM was rescued, why wasn't other divers allowed to go back in to attempt to rescue the other 4?
Alright, so I don't know if the rest of you have heard it, but the question from Priya Bihari at ACP News is, he says that the question everyone is asking is why after Mr. BOODRAM was rescued, weren't other divers allowed to go in and perform a rescue? fellow citizens, at this stage, as I said, there's no room for speculation, no room for assumptions. Those were judgment calls by persons at the time. I certainly don't have the answer for that. I am not even going to speculate an answer. From what I was told is the experts there at the time, including the Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard, did risk assessments and took decisions that it was too risky. From the diagram I've shown you, what I can tell you is you are leaping onto the unknown literally, and that the judgment call may have been made that an additional person going into distress, being lost and being injured or a loss of life was not part of that risk assessment at the time. But it makes no sense me speculating or me assuming anything. Thank you. Next question, please. Next question from Miss, is it? Who are you all identifying?
Bina Mahis.
Miss Bina Mahis? If you can just identify what news agency you're from. Miss Bina Mahis?
Okay, we'll have to move on to Renuka Singh because Bina doesn't appear to be hearing us.
Okay, Renuka Singh from Guardian Media.
I have two questions.
Go ahead.
Luke City.
Go ahead.
Hi, can you hear some Luke City? Are you hearing me?
Yes, I am.
Yes. I have two questions from Luke City. Luke Titi. Yes. From Luke Titi.
Go ahead, Bina Mahis.
Hi, good afternoon. Oh, sorry, good morning, sorry. I don't know what's going on. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we're hearing Renuka Singh from Guardian Media.
No, we're saying...
Renuka Singh
We're
from
saying
Guardian Media. Please proceed to ask your question. Renuka Singh, Guardian Media. Please proceed to ask
Right,
your
thank
question.
you. We're seeing information of yet another investigative committee, almost as if it's like a panacea for everything that has seen in the country. But the thing is, based on information that came out last night, and this is not speculation, this was from one of the divers who helped with the rescue of the lone survivor. There were a lot of things, a lot of red tape still in place, permits, change of ship, that hindered any of the attempts to rescue the men earlier on. Are you satisfied that PARIA has enough emergency planning in place so that a situation like this does not happen again? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question, Ms. Singh. The answer is from where I stand and looking on, it appears as though there may be gaps in the system, but again, it is not for speculation. I too saw what was being said by the brave diver who went in and got Mr. BOODRAM out. He didn't go into the pipeline, but Mr. BOODRAM was at the top of the pipeline. And this is why there must be an independent investigation. This is why we're looking for expertise from two global multinationals who have expertise in these areas and all areas of oil and gas, because we need to identify what went on. There's no way any of us can do that on our own, and that is why this investigative committee will be tasked with the duty to find the facts and to find out exactly what it is went on and where there were gaps and these types of things, and to then report back to us, the population. Timmy,
you can proceed to ask your question.
Who's next?
Urvashi, your question. Urvashi, can you unmute and ask your question, please?
Hi, Ms. Urvashi Tiwari from TV6. Can you unmute and ask your question, please? Afterwards, we'll come back to Ms. Mahis. Okay, can we go to Ms. Mahis, please? Ms. Bina Mahis from Loop News.
Ms. Bina Mahis, can you proceed to ask your question? Ms. Bina Mahis, can you proceed to ask your question?
Sure. Bina Mahis, Loop City News. I have two quick questions, please. Minister, do you know if the divers had an intercom system with communication control during the dive? If not, why were they not provided with an intercom system? As well as my second question. Yes. Sure. Minister, would you be able to tell us if the divers had an intercom system with them to communicate during their diving exercise? As well as my second question would be, is the Coast Guard trained for such situations? For example, a potential Delta P and pipeline recovery. And if not, why were they given preference for the rescue? Thank you.
Thank you very much for those two questions. To respond to the first question, the answer is I do not know whether there was an intercom system being operated at the point in time. So that question will have to be answered by LMCS and PARIA at the appropriate time. With respect to the second question and the reference to Delta P, we've all seen and we've all been having circulated to us in the last 48 hours all of these videos of Delta P and the learning on Delta P, etc. Again, none of us are experts who are looking at these Delta P videos. So I am waiting for the outcome of the investigation to see whether that phenomenon that is described as Delta P is what took place here. And to respond to whether the Coast Guard are trained, yes, the Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard are specifically trained in search and rescue dive operations. They are the ones who would have formed part of the risk assessment. They would have not been necessarily the decision makers at the time, but there would have been weight given to what the Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard would have indicated at the time. And yes, they do have divers who have a level of training and who would have been trained in search and rescue operations. Them combined with the other experts who would have been industry type divers would have been making the risk assessments. Thank you. Let's go back to Ms. Urvashi Tiwari of TV6 News. Urvashi, if you're hearing us, please unmute your microphone and ask your questions. We are not seeing any other hands up from any of the other reporters. Okay, Sean Douglas from Newsday. Mr. Sean Douglas from Newsday, please unmute your mic and ask your questions.
Sean Douglas, please unmute your mic and ask your question.
Good day, Minister.
Sean Douglas from Newsday.
Yeah, good day, Minister.
Sean Douglas from Newsday, please unmute your mic and ask your questions.
Yes, here we go. The question is, would the committee, the investigative committee, would the investigative committee have any representation from the trade unions going forward?
Yes, thank you for that question, Mr. Douglas. Would the trade unions have any representation? I assume you mean on the committee. The answer is no.
Renuka Singh, can you unmute and ask your question?
Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm curious as to Hi, good morning. I'm trying just to find out what was the protocol and why they reinstalled the riser cap to cap off the line, which is what the men would have been familiar with. Like, this is coming from information that would have been gleaned from what was said by the rescue diver last night. And that the riser cap was put on at the one exit that the men went through. And would that have hampered the situation and they're trying to escape? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question, Mr. Renuka Singh. Yes, I did see that reference being made by the gentleman who dived and got Mr. BOODRAM. However, my information and the information provided to me is no such riser cap would have been put back on. As you all know, there was nobody that went back into the pipe after this unfortunate incident, apart from those divers, that diver who managed to get Mr. BOODRAM out, which is what would have had to have happened for a riser cap. But again, I don't want to delve into any speculation, and I hope that the investigation will unearth all that actually happened so we can then be provided with that information. Okay, let's try and take the questions from Urvashi and
Urvashi, can you proceed to ask your question?
Morning, Minister. Urvashi from TV6. I missed Renuka's last question. I hope it is not the same as mine, but I'm trying to find out why was the pipeline capped off with the men inside, one? And two, just to be clear, did any state divers enter into those waters to attempt any rescue? Did anyone aside from that one volunteer attempt any rescue? Were any robotic devices or anything sent into the water? Can you please give us an idea of the attempts made to rescue these men? Thank you.
thank you very much for those questions, Ms. Urvashi Tiwari. The first question was asked by Ms. Renuka Singh, but you said you couldn't hear it, so I won't get back into that. The second question, did anyone from the state attempt a rescue? My understanding is the Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard on Friday night did make an assessment and did not perform any diving into the pipeline type rescue. The answer with respect to the robotics is yes, robotics were used, as I tried to outline at the start, both on ROV as well as camera scopes were put into the pipeline. That is the standard procedure to be used in these types of circumstances. So the technology and equipment was used, and it was visibility that was lost, and that is how they managed to locate the blockage in the 1,200 feet of pipeline running from berth 5 to berth 6 pipelines, and the two air tanks that were blocking that passageway. That was located through the use of the camera system, which unfortunately could not go beyond that. All right. I think if there are any other reporters who haven't already asked a question that want to ask a question, then I think let's take the last question, please.
Can you unmute and ask your question, please?
I do have a question, Minister, if you'd allow me. It's Urvashi again.
One, Urvashi.
The industry experts that were supposed to be giving advice, could you tell us who they are, one? Two, how soon was that advice submitted to PARIA? And of course, do industry safety guidelines and standards now come into question? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Ms. Tiwari has asked, who were the industry experts giving advice and when did they start giving that advice? I don't have the names of these persons. I do know, because in speaking to both Shell and BP, the presidents, the persons in charge of the Trinidad operations, they did indicate to me, independently of what I was told by PARIA during the course of the weekend, that they had provided persons to give advice and to assist in the operations. So I know that they had provided persons. I do know as well that other persons in the industry, all of this information will have to be provided to the public during the course of these investigations. All right. Members of the media, thank you all very much for participating. I apologize for any glitches that we may have had. Trinidad and Tobago, as we go through another trying time, another test of our nation, I ask that everyone have an appreciation, have the necessary concern and empathy for the families. The families are going through difficult times. PARIA has been given the instructions to please make the families as comfortable as possible and to please provide as much communication directly to the families as is possible. At this stage, it is not useful, I'll end by saying, for us to continue in the realm of speculation and assuming, nor for us to be adding any extra burden onto these family members at this time. They must be allowed the space to go through their emotions with our support as a population that I know is Trinidad and Tobago. I give the assurance that this investigation will take place and we will get the appropriate independent, professional experts to lend their expertise to the finding of what went on and any gaps that may have occurred. In the meantime, please join me as we continue to pray for the recovery of these 4 divers, our 4 citizens. Thank you very much.
Introducing NLC